All right, it looks like we are live. Hello, humans. Welcome to another edition of This Week in Cassandra. And this week we are joined, as usual, by technical evangelist John Haddad and Juihai Doan. And then we are also fortunate to have Al Toby, former technical evangelist, used to be on the evangelist team here at DataStax, now works for Netflix. And we're super excited about that. Al is definitely an expert when it comes to ops and Cassandra, and I like to say that he's probably forgotten more about Linux than I ever knew. So this should be a good time. So if you are following along on the Cassandra Planet Cassandra blog post, we're going to talk about a couple of those posts a little bit here. And the first one we kind of wanted to discuss was this blog post about securing client and node communications in Cassandra. So communications from your app to the Cassandra cluster. And Juihai, you were saying you really liked this. What was it in particular that you kind of thought was good about this post?
So yes, look. So just to give the context, recently we have a lot of tech article telling that this NoSQL database is so unsecure that everyone can access them on the internet. So this blog post will just give people all the steps one by one how to set up, certificate and to create an SSL secure layer between the client and their Cassandra cluster. And it is really a no-brainer because even if you don't know anything about security, you can just follow all the steps one by one, and at the end of the day, you can have something which is working pretty fine. So I have some knowledge about security, but if you don't have any, you can just follow all the steps. It's really, really, really great. And I need to stress that never go to production without security. Security should be mandatory on your checklist whenever you deploy Cassandra into production.
Yeah, I wonder how many production clusters out there actually have client-to-node encryption. I know a lot of people do node-to-node encryption because that's pretty easy to set up, but I don't know about client-to-node.
Yeah, that was definitely
no real metrics.
There's a tooling problem there, right? Is the tooling for creating and distributing certificates to servers is still kind of just a growing industry, I guess, but there's Lemur from Netflix I've used recently that we have internally for generating certificates, and it's pretty easy to use, and it'll automatically deploy to Cloud HSM. And then there's HashiCorp Vault, which does some similar things in terms of managing secrets, and I think you can use it for distribution. I shouldn't say much more because I don't know it that well. But in general, I mean, just this problem is really hard to solve, and if you look at the config management tools, they have their own little things for generating certs and kind of hiding all that complexity. That's one of the things I like about this blog post is they kind of let it all hang out there in terms of using the OpenSSL command line to generate certificates, and it's not that scary looking at it here, whereas a lot of times you get into these posts about how to do this, and there's a lot of scary text about the dangers of using OpenSSL.
So one of the things that I've always kind of never really wrapped my head around was, it's cool that you can, let's say, generate certificates on a machine and pass everything around, but when we start talking about like these certificate stores, then my mind starts to wonder, like, what happens if that's compromised, and how easy is that to compromise, and how do you secure that? Like, that's something that I have zero experience with, and like, I don't know. It's one of those, like, okay, well, I don't really. It's not obvious to me how these things are secured, and so, like, then it makes it kind of like so what's the point of even doing security if it's not obvious? What do you guys think about that?
Well, I would say what people should know about security is that security is really a binary thing. Either all your chain is secure or it is not. Even if you spend a lot of time securing parts of your chain, if you have a single part into your chain which is broken, so your chain is open to any kind of attack. That's the problem. That's why
I disagree with that. I think the important thing, especially for this post and kind of Cassandra security and client security, is the old, you don't hear it as much as you used to, but it's an old phrase in the security industry called defense in depth. And yeah, sure, your root CA, your self-signed CA might get owned at some point. But part of the concept of defense in depth is there's always a 0-day somewhere. And you put in processes and procedures and automation so that if it does get owned, then you simply go and replace the entire CA chain. And you reboot all your hosts and you re-image them, and then you recover from backups so that you're in a known good state. But there's a lot of pieces to that, and it's complex, and it requires a lot of discipline. And that's why a lot of people just say, screw it, because that binary approach to it is saying, oh, well, it's hard, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, so I won't do anything. But the reality is, like you were saying earlier, is you need to people need to be encrypting their connections so that, if somebody does just happen to get a tap on their network, they're not going to get crap, right? They've still got to own the machine to get to the certificates. They've still got to own the CA to get to the root CA. And there's a longer path to where somebody gets complete control of your environment.
Yeah.
All right, so kind of switching gears a little bit. We had a second blog post as well that we kind of wanted to talk about, and this was a super in-depth one from the Yelp engineering team, and they're talking about how they monitor Cassandra at scale and some of the sort of tools they use and whatnot. The one thing that I thought was interesting before I kind of open this up to everybody, the one thing I thought was interesting was the kind of focus that they had on knowing the consistency levels used in the application and sort of applying that to and the replication factor of the key spaces, and then applying that to be able to calculate availability. I don't think I'd ever seen that spelled out or maybe necessarily used, like using both of those inputs to try and determine how available your cluster is. So I thought that was kind of cool. But anyone else thoughts on this blog post from Yelp?
I thought it was a pretty clever post. I've looked at that approach before of doing using the replication factor to determine if the cluster is healthy, and it was a lot easier in the bad old days of static token ranges because you could just do a little bit of work and understand how many tests you need to run. With B nodes, it gets a little more tricky. But I'm always always in favor of application level testing, which says run an actual query and see what it does. There's the kind of the black box monitoring off to the side, where we come in over JMX, or in this case Jalokia, which is another nice thing to see out there. But that gives you kind of a synthetic view of the system, whereas if you come in through over CQL, you get kind of for real what your application is experiencing.
Yeah. I definitely, Al, I'm with you. Whenever I built a system, there was always, monitoring effectively every level. It's, we need to know if our disks are getting full, and then we need to know what Cassandra is reporting for disk usage. But we also need to build things, especially if we have APIs we're exposing. I always build a set of APIs that were used to determine if the system was healthy. And it was nice because you could use that at a very high level, and it would grab real data. And it was queries that we know needed to work, and so you could execute those. But you could also look at a super granular level. So what was nice was those APIs would give you is this thing working? That's just a binary yes no. And if the answer is no, you can then use the other statistics to figure out what's wrong. Because a full disk doesn't, especially with a Cassandra cluster where it's you could lose an entire rack and your cluster still up. Right. The thing that you really care about is, are my users screwed?
Right.
And I think that's why I like doing the multi-layer approach to operations.
Juiha, you said you liked the fact that they were exposing the JMX stuff over HTTP, correct?
Yes, because they were mentioning Jolokia. I think that this tool is not known enough by the community. This is a really nice tool because you can expose all the JMX metrics over HTTP. Because let be honest, nowadays very few people like working with raw JMX. People is familiar with REST API, HTTP. So it's a nice tool to add in your toolbox when you are an ops.
Yeah, I think I'd rather stick my finger in a light socket than work with JMX again. Yeah.
It's awful. It's so awful.
You know, and the thing that really drives me crazy about JMX is, you know, I've worked around a large variety of ops people of varying skill levels and DBAs, and the thing is almost nobody who came through an ops background and is not a Java engineer can get their head wrapped around how around that thing. It's just they kind of hit their head against it, throw some kind of, and then usually end up writing shell scripts that parse the output of Node tool because using JMX directly is so awful. And then we'll show up and say, hey, you know, maybe you should hit JMX directly because you can get full resolution data and type preservation and you get structured data. And they just go, no, you know, I'd rather wrap a shell script around a shell script that wraps around a jar that connects to JMX so that I can get my stats.
Yep.
And that's how bad it is.
Yep. I'm that guy. I actually had I finally got merged in. I think it's either went into 3.4 or in 3.6, but like I think before I even worked at DataStax, I had submitted a JIRA to get CF histograms in either JSON or YAML, some sort of structured format, and that finally happened. It's like I asked for it in like 1.2, and now it's like in 3.6. Like, so the big
proponent of, you know, if you look at DBAs at almost every RDBMS that's been around since the 80s, they all use just their natural SQL client. You know, if you're MySQL, you can hit the performance tables. If you're in Oracle, you have the performance schema. Just whichever database it is, almost everybody is going directly through their SQL interface over the natural protocol. Cassandra has to solve some different problems than those because you have a large cluster of nodes and you need to be able to address them individually for monitoring. But that's a mere matter of bits, right? That I think just leads down that path of being able to get more administrators writing more tools for Cassandra and their own little custom monitoring tools. You know, they can write their Nagios plugins or their whatever their monitoring system is, but they can use the language that they're best at as well.
Yep.
And that's the kind of outcomes that I like to see.
There is a Jira ticket already. I think it's quite old. The idea is
Very
to
old.
create a virtual table to expose all the JMX metrics as just raw SQL data.
Really old.
But I don't know how it is.
It's
Maybe
going nowhere. It's,
Yeah, John and I have stood in rooms and jumped up and down before about that one.
yeah. It's
Why
it's
do you
just
think that is? Why does it go nowhere when it seems like you know, everyone kind of agrees that would be the way to go? You know, like
Well, the
everyone
old
here.
reason was that before the new SS table formats and the abstractions that came with that, it was really hard to create kind of virtual tables because there wasn't a interface there that could be re-implemented to do that. You know, I think that is apparently that code is done now, and we're on what 3.5 now. So
3.6 is up for vote.
So 3.6 is up for vote. So hopefully that that excuse is gone, and maybe this will come back up again soon.
Awesome. So so last we kind of wanted to spend some time talking to Al. So Al, you know, you're working for Netflix. It sounds like maybe you're not doing a ton of Cassandra work these days, but what have you been up to? What are you doing these days?
Yeah, my exposure to Cassandra is kind of on the way because where I work is in the core team, and what we do is we own the availability at the end of the day of the Netflix service. So various people on the team disagree with this, but I kind of explain it as the last line of defense. Now, it's not kind of the traditional ops last line of defense. I don't really log into servers very often to fix them. What it is if one of the engineering teams misses an alert, for example, or they don't have alerting in place and their service crashes, and the Netflix service goes offline, somebody has to own that at the end of the day. You know, we're all the way down the rabbit hole of DevOps, but that there's still a gap occasionally where, you know, say our proxy service dies, and the page falls through, the engineers don't hit it, if it escalates, somebody has to come in and say, and make sure that incident gets managed through so we get the service back online and get our users back watching Netflix. So that's what my team does, is we own the incident management process, and we kind of catch all of the stuff that falls through the cracks. And then we drive that through and go back and work with the engineering teams to make sure that they address it in the future.
So what else?
So that's been fun.
what interesting, you mentioned some Kong testing earlier when we were chatting. Like what kind of interesting stuff are you guys doing on your team or inside of Netflix? I think a lot of people, like Netflix gets held up as sort of the gold standard a lot of times for DevOps, and also, I mean, in the Cassandra community, we reference you guys a ton because you're proponents. So, what kind of interesting stuff are you guys doing? Maybe give us a peek behind the curtain. I mean, you're pretty open about it.
It's kind of cool. What my team does is, a lot of what we do is fairly boring, right? Is incidents and responding to them, and kind of some of the tooling around that. But one of our roles is consultative through the rest of the business, and we work with other teams in terms of making sure that our availability is really great. How do we measure it? How do we talk about it? And one of the teams we work very closely with is our chaos engineering team. And a lot of people in the tech world have heard about this, but what a lot of people, Netflix users, don't know is we move traffic out of data centers all the time. It's probably once a week we have some kind of chaos exercise, and I think about once a month we'll completely evacuate one of our data centers. Wow. So you might, and users don't even know. We've gotten so good at it now that it's kind of a non-event, and so we have to make sure that we keep awareness up. There's actually an effort that we have to make to say, hey, there's a Kong exercise going on, because people will walk by our desks and be like, hey, is something going on in US East 1? And we'll go, well, there's a Kong exercise, and they'll go, oh, okay, and then they'll go back on their merry way, because they'll just see their stats will drop off, and they'll go, oh, crap, there's nothing happening in US East 1, I'm not getting any traffic. Well, it's all in Europe and US West 2. So that's kind of a really fun thing that we do, and that's one of those things that Netflix leans very heavily on Cassandra for, is we don't have to worry about kind of these messes around, I moved my MySQL master from US East 1 to US West 2, and then it's going to take 3 hours to move it back because I have to synchronize all of the primary keys and the synchronization logs and move all the slaves back over to the master config. It's a big, ugly mess. Whereas we just move the traffic, and then we move it back.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the nice things about designing for multi-DC. Once you nail that design down, I feel like you would never design anything any other way. If you care about HA.
Yeah, it's got its cost, right? In terms of you got to engineer for it, you've got to build your systems around it. But then once you get there, there's kind of a easy power available to you in that, we'll get a call and somebody will say, hey, I think something's funny in US East 1, maybe Amazon's having network problems, and we'll go, okay, and we'll just leave, right? It's you're at the bar and you start to see a fight breaking out and you go, yeah, I'm out of here, and that's what we do, and that's just kind of a nice easy thing that we get in the cloud that a lot of, if you don't have multi-data center design out of the box, you can't do.
Yep.
So is there anything, now that you actually work for Netflix, is there anything, like, I don't know, give us some insider thing that you've learned now that you're inside the firewall, as opposed to before when you were working with us at DataStax, and I'm sure you worked with Netflix tons when you were still at DataStax, but is there anything that kind of surprised you, or anything cool that you kind of learned?
Let me think.
Have you new insight now that you're working with Cassandra? I mean, it's hard to replicate the scale, that they're working, like you guys are working with Cassandra, in internal to DataStax.
Well, when I was interviewing, and kind of the thing I've found, this is going to sound a bit fanboyish, but is the Netflix culture deck is one of my favorite things in the whole world, and it was before I started there. And the thing that I really drilled them on was, is it real? Is it real? Is it real? Because when you read it, it sounds like a fairy tale, right? Freedom and responsibility, and if you make a technical decision, you just go for it, and it's real. And sometimes it feels like walking a tightrope without a net, because you're kind of like, okay, so you mean I can just go do this and go, and I can use Cassandra or whatever service I want? And they're like, yeah, you just go ahead and do whatever. Okay, we hired you to be a good engineer, so make good decisions, please.
Pretty awesome.
And it's not have meetings and design meetings and stuff like that. A lot of times, when I'm going to put something together, I'll talk to my team, because that's just being a decent human being, which I can pull off on from time to time. but there is that freedom, but there's also the responsibility, and I think that's one of the things that inside being on the inside, it just has taken a while to really wrap my head around.
I'm curious. One other random question that I've seen, like Netflix. I saw some tweets going around, in this past week, where it looks like you open sourced another part of the Dynamite package. So that's the thing that basically takes Redis and makes it, or any sounds like it takes any sort of key value store and kind of makes it distributed. Have you had any interaction with that, in your role and kind of, what's going on with that project? I didn't realize that Netflix was so heavily invested in some of this stuff like Redis and that kind of thing.
I haven't run into it a whole lot. It's mostly just been behind the scenes and hasn't blown up in a spectacular. So I only really find out about things if it blows up in a spectacular way. And so, I mean, it has to be like all of our ASGs blew up, right? Something like that. Or Ultra DNS melts down globally kind of thing. That's the kind of stuff that bubbles up. So I haven't heard a lot about Dynamite. I hang out with that team every once in a while. There's the interesting thing about it is that a lot of people don't realize we talk, or when I was at DataStax, we talked a lot about how Cassandra is in use at Netflix, but we didn't talk a lot about about the other systems that are wrapped around it. So there's things like a huge memcache farm, the EV cache farm, and that's used for almost everything that you hit from the client is probably hitting a bunch of keys inside EV cache, and that is a massive cluster. And the other thing is kind of the joke. That's a different thing, but it gets used by pretty much all of our services. I was going to go into a thing about Atlas, but our monitoring system, but we can come back to that.
Anybody else have questions for Al? We're getting close to time here.
I don't think so.
Cool. Good. All right. Well, Al, thank you for coming on. I think I saw you retweeted something. It looks like Netflix has like 17 open Cassandra positions right now. If anyone's looking to go and enjoy that Netflix culture.
Yeah, and it's that's again Cassandra being ubiquitous. It's teams all across our engineering org, from security to client applications. It's pretty much all of our distributed infrastructure at some point will touch a Cassandra instance either directly or indirectly.
Awesome.
Right on.
All right. Well, thank you, Al, and
All
John, and we will see everyone hopefully next week on next week's This Week in Cassandra.
Bye-bye.